And now an update on the recovery efforts. An investigation into the downed flight MH17 in eastern Ukraine. And more clashes in Donetsk region today could further delay the removal of victims' bodies from the crash site. An unknown number of black body bags have been loaded onto refrigerated trains, but it's uncertain where the trains are headed. There's international anger over the lack of investigator access to the crash site, which is currently being controlled by pro-Russian separatists. An air accident investigators suspect evidence is being tampered with and that the Malaysian airliner's black boxes have been seized. Dutch prosecutors have launched an investigation of suspicion of murder, war crimes and internationally downing an airliner. Earlier today, President Obama addressed the situation at the crash site from the White House. Take a listen.
Ukrainian President Poroshenko has declared a demilitarized zone around the crash site. As I said before, you have international teams already in place prepared to conduct the investigation and recover the remains of those who have been lost. But unfortunately, the Russian-backed separatists who control the area continue to block the investigation. They've repeatedly prevented international investigators from gaining full access to the wreckage. As investigators approached, they fired their weapons into the air. These separatists are removing evidence from the crash site, all of which begs the question, what exactly are they trying to hide? Moreover, these Russian-backed separatists are removing bodies from the crash site, oftentimes without the care that we would normally expect from a tragedy like this. And this is an insult to those who've lost loved ones.
Apparent evidence of missile damage to the plane's body is being reported as well. Now, foreign correspondent for the Times newspaper, Tom Coughlin, tweeted this photo and said, quote, apparent missile shrapnel damage to forward cargo bay section of MH17 corroborated by aviation experts. In response to the crash and Russia's possible involvement, European leaders are pushing to impose increased sanctions on Moscow. British Prime Minister David Cameron has demanded that Russia stop supporting rebels in Ukraine and called on Europe to step up. For too long, there has been a reluctance on the part of too many European countries to face up to the implications of what is happening in eastern Ukraine. It is time to make our power, influence and resources count. Well, Russia, meanwhile, continues to deny any involvement. The senior Russian military officer said at a special briefing on Monday, quote, I want to stress that Russia did not give the rebels book missile systems or any kinds of weapons or military hardware. Well, joining us now from Ukraine is Chief Editor of the Kiev Post, Brian Bonner. So, Brian, thank you very much for joining me. What do we know currently about the access to the crash site for international investigators? We're seeing reports of journalists being given items by workers at the scene. Who's actually in charge over there?
That's a good question. Who's in charge? Well, who's in charge remained the Russian-backed separatists. We heard our reporters on the ground laid out a situation similar to what President Obama just laid out. There's no full access. We don't know where the bodies are going. There is fuselage and parts of the plane that appear to be evident that are not being properly cared for. So. As we understand from Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk today, the international team is in place and ready to start working. Don't know at this minute whether they have full access.
And, Brian, you mentioned that President Obama, obviously we heard him speaking a short time ago. Some of the pressure is also coming from Ukraine's side. Poroshenko told CNN he hopes that the U.S. Congress will consider those responsible for downing MH17 as members of a terrorist organization. What do you make of that? What do you make of his comments?
Well, I mean, this is terrorism. That is what's happening here. It's a little bit frustrating in Ukraine. The frustration is high because we've heard the same warnings from the West for 4 or 5 months that this is a wake-up call, that Russia should stop supporting it. The terrorism that's going on in the East after they took over and annexed Crimea, but still waiting for really hard sanctions. The sanctions that have been applied are soft. And I think the story of the day was Yatsenyuk outlining in great, point-by-point detail all the evidence that they've been able to put together, which is Russian financing, Russian arming, and even, very damning, the fact that the Prime Minister alleges that this plane could not have been shot down without help from advanced radar systems from Russia.
Yeah, and we heard President Obama when he was talking, he said now's the time for Putin and Russia to pivot away from the strategy that they've taken. He said time is of the essence. Obviously, Moscow is being heavily criticized by many leaders, not just the United States, and it's been threatened with increased sanctions, as you mentioned. I mean, is there any indication that these threats are making any kind of impact?
No, there isn't. To the contrary, if you looked at Vladimir Putin's hastily arranged video conference, he looked very angry and unrepentant. The Russian media are certainly dissembling the story and coming up with crazy conspiracy scenarios that bear no relation to the facts on the ground. And today we learned from the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine that the Russian troops are massing on the border, and that Ukraine only controls slightly more than half of the checkpoints on the border. So it's a very dangerous situation still, and there's no evidence that Putin is backing down at all. To the contrary, it looks like he's going to continue on his path of aggression and war.
And what do you think, on that note, I've got a tweet here, this is from Foreign Policy, speak softly and carry a big stick. Barack Obama seems to have misplaced the stick. It's an article in Foreign Policy that we'll put in our resource well. If sanctions or the threat of sanctions aren't working, what do you see as a way of resolving what we're seeing going on in Ukraine at the moment with this division between the pro-Russian and the pro-Russian separatists and those loyal to sovereign Ukraine?
Well, this is not a civil war. The fighting would go away if Russia didn't support it. These are Russian citizens who are leading it, Russian citizens who are training it, Russian military intelligence agents who are helping it. It is not a civil war. Unfortunately, contrary to what the West says, there are, it's mostly been empty threats, unfortunately. They were so far away from sanctions that to this day, France still plans to sell 2 Mistral attack warships to Russia. We know, Germany set up an advanced military training center for Russian soldiers, which may have come in handy in their invasion. And the West, the European Union, several members, do not seem at all inclined to take a tough stand against Russia. And now, this is what Ukraine has been asking for, is tough sanctions, isolating, sectoral sanctions that punish Russia's finance, energy, and defense industries. The world has chosen to see this as a Ukraine-Russia conflict. The Malaysian Airlines disaster shows that this is a threat to world peace, and it must be met with a strong response. And that's not been forthcoming. The only thing that's been forthcoming is strong words, which have been basically the same words since Russia invaded Crimea on February 27th.
Absolutely. Well, we've also been seeing reports of journalists being detained at gunpoint after trying to access the crash site. And there you can see one of the headlines, one of the many headlines. Can you just tell us a little bit more about this? Has any kind of access to the crash site been made any more available to journalists trying to work there? Well, you put up a good headline today. Police reporters detained. The reporters that our reporters who are there say they are told where to go, how long they can stay, and what they can do by the Russian-backed separatists. So there's not free access to the site. There's nobody in control of the site. A journalist called me yesterday from the site where the bodies were being kept, the refrigerated rail cars, no security, nobody watching it. They were just there. I mean, it's really a grotesque abuse of human rights and abuse of the dignity of these people and the nations where they came from. I mean, it's a mess. Let's hope that, from the top, that the orders, and they're taking command from Russia. We will see very soon whether or not the international investigators have full access, unfettered access to the black box flight recorders, which are now in possession of the separatists, to the bodies, to the fuselage,
the Prime Minister is talking about his preference would be an international investigation that is led by the Netherlands, and that the bodies would go to the forensic pathology labs in Amsterdam.